There are these moments in history that are just like a flash of lightning. They light up a brand new path forward. And in that instant, the old world just vanishes into the shadows. Well, for the modern Republic of Turkey, that lightning strike was March 3rd, 1924. It's a huge question, right? Can a nation really be born in a single day? But on that one day, a series of laws were passed that didn't just tweak the system. They were like a form of political surgery, fundamentally rewriting the nation's DNA.
See, the thing is, even though the Republic had been officially declared back in 1923, it was born with a critical, paralyzing condition. And it was a condition that had to be dealt with, and fast, if this new state was ever going to survive.
So, what was the diagnosis? Well, you could say it was a state with two heads, both pulling in completely opposite directions. You had a new government, founded on the idea of the people's sovereignty. And then you had this ancient institution, claiming its authority came from God. This was the crisis of Çift Başlılık, or dual authority. It was paralyzing. Imagine, the Grand National Assembly in Ankara is passing modern laws, but at the same time, the Caliphate in Istanbul is still this incredibly powerful symbol. It's a rallying point for all the opposition, and its legitimacy comes from an imperial past, not a national future. The state was literally at war with itself.
And this is so important, because it wasn't just some political squabble, it was a fundamental conflict over what it even meant to be a person in this new country. Were you a reya, which basically means part of a flock, guided by a ruler, or were you a citizen, an individual with rights, who was part of a sovereign nation? You just couldn't be both.
Okay, before we dive into how they solved this massive problem, just a quick note, the information in this explainer was put together from open sources. If you're finding this useful, please take a second to subscribe, turn on notifications, and like this presentation. It really helps support our work. Thank you. So the solution, it couldn't be a compromise, no way. It had to be a clean break. It had to be a coordinated, surgical strike that went right for the heart of this dual authority. And that's exactly what the Assembly did on March 3rd, with 3 incredibly decisive laws. And this is where it gets so interesting, because these 3 laws were a package deal. First, bam, Law 431 gets rid of the Caliphate, the ultimate symbol of the old way. Second, Law 429 dismantles the Ministry of Sharia, replacing it with modern departments, and, this is huge, it took the military out of the cabinet, making it a professional force. And third, Law 430 unified all education, making sure the next generation would grow up as citizens of a republic, not subjects of a caliph. And you have to understand, the sheer audacity of this was noticed all over the world, even by their former enemies. The British Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, who just fought a war against the Ottomans, pretty much admitted how formidable Mustafa Kemal was, with this quote that's kind of a mix of frustration and, you have to say, respect.
But you could argue that the most profound law of all wasn't aimed at an institution, but at the mind itself. Law 430, the unification of education, was designed to solve the deepest dual authority, the one that was happening inside the classroom. I mean, a nation just can't work when it's running 2 completely different educational systems, producing 2 totally different kinds of people. You had the madrasa, which was all about religious dogma and loyalty to the past. And then you had the New Republic schools, which were meant to be about science, reason, and loyalty to a secular national future. This wasn't just about what was in the textbooks. It was about forging the very soul of the nation.
At the end of the day, the real goal wasn't just to build new buildings or write new laws. It was to cultivate a whole new way of thinking. The big idea was to create a citizenry that valued intellectual freedom and a rational outlook, people who could actually participate in and sustain a modern country. But let's be real, a transformation this fast and this radical, well, it was never going to be painless. This was not some gentle, gradual evolution. It was more like a forced march into modernity, and yeah, it came with a heavy price. The new republic was under immense pressure. You had foreign powers trying to interfere, seeing the caliphate as a tool they could use. Internally, there were uprisings from conservative groups who saw all this as a direct attack on their faith and their entire way of life. And the methods they used? Well, they were definitely authoritarian, which led to accusations of dictatorship that are still part of the historical debate today. This diagram here really captures the whole spirit of the project. Unlike a slow, gradual modernization, this was a deliberate, sharp pivot. It shows that this westernization period wasn't an extension of the past, but a conscious and very abrupt break from the Islamic Ottoman tradition. It was about creating a new identity altogether.
So, when you boil it all down, March 3rd wasn't just about the laws. It was a declaration. They called it a civilization preference. It was a conscious, high-stakes choice to say, okay, our future is aligned with a world model based on science and national sovereignty, not one tied to religion and empire. It was a decision that would define what kind of nation Turkey was going to be. And that, of course, brings us from the past right up to the present. The leaders in 1924, they diagnosed their crisis of dual authority, and they made a decisive choice to solve it, for better or for worse. And it kind of forces us to ask a question about our own time.
Think about it. A century ago, the challenge was a state with two heads. Today, in our world of misinformation, climate crisis, and technological disruption, what are the paralyzing dualities that we're facing? Back then, they chose logic over dogma because they believed it was necessary for survival. So what is the fundamental choice that's going to define our survival and our future? What is our next March 3rd moment?